So do we have chapter slides in minute management? Who would be useful to take minutes? Everyone can do minutes or slides. Oh! Oh. Oh. That was actually just tie the wire down. Come on. There we go. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Capport Portal. Hopefully you intended to be here. Apparently you didn't. Bye. So do you have anything in here about blue sheets, etc.? Slides. So as I say, this is Capport Portal. Here is the note well. By now you probably should have seen the note well. Please make sure that you note it well and understand what it means. It has important stuff. We will not try and interpret this for you. If you want to know what it is, you should speak to a lawyer / attorney / rabbi / whatever. This is our agenda. Hopefully you've all seen it. Hopefully if you're listed here, you know that you're listed here. I believe we have spoken with everyone. So anybody have any agenda bashing? Going once, going twice. The blue sheets. The blue sheets are busy circulating. Please make sure that you actually sign the blue sheets. If you do not, we get a smaller room next time, and people may not all fit. Do you want to do the update on the status?
All right, so this one, just check. We have a new working group here. We have 3 things in our charter that we are chartered to accomplish. I see that Barry's already into the beer here, which is the other thing. What I neglected to add to the slides is that we have beverages for our former area director, or soon to be former area director, and expect something in the mail.
JavaScripts.
Do we have a JavaScript?
We need a minute taker and a JavaScribe. Would anybody like to volunteer, or will we just choose someone at random? Thank you, sir. Paul Ebersman, sir. Yeah. Would you like to do minutes? Would you mind doing minutes? You get a gold star if you do. Okay, thank you. You please do the minutes.
Also, we'll let you press the red button. So these are the 3 items that we have. I don't know why the first one is listed first, but that's the way the charter lists them as well. The 2 things that we're working on, I think at the moment, is what is a captive portal and the why, which is what we see in the industry. Then we have a protocol and some listed things in the later sections. Just gonna do that. Okay, so the what question. So I get this all the time. That's what a captive portal looks like. This is also what a captive portal looks like. Exactly. This is about as much comprehension as I get out of most captive portals. I have nothing more than that. Probably more relevant to us is the why. So there is a theory that it's all about eyeballs. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the scene in Minority Report where this happens. But it turns out that access control using eyeballs seemed relevant. That may not be the only reason. We've gotten a fair bit of feedback from captive portal operators about these sorts of things in the past couple of weeks, in fact, and been some excellent emails to the list on this very subject. And we're also going to hear from Jason later about his views on this one. The how is the protocol piece, and we've been talking about looking for volunteers to actually write some of this stuff. The charter is surprisingly prescriptive when it comes to this. So if anyone is looking for a My First Internet draft, this is pretty good because someone's written you a pretty clear set of instructions on what to put in that draft. If you think that you're willing to do this, we'd like to hear from you. Those things would be, how do you discover that you have a captive portal? And I think that Warren has solved that problem for us already before the working group even started.
Kind of.
Maybe. And there may be some other things as well in that area, which covers the second point, which is, where is the captive portal? I think Warren's draft on that point doesn't actually say what the URL is and how you might interact with that URL. It just says there's a URL over there, and we might want to describe in more detail what it is that URL is, and then to learn about the parameters of their confinement, which is what sites can you access, what sites can you not access, are you able to use just DNS, are there restrictions on where you can go, all those sorts of other things, which would allow someone to potentially use some services without going through the captive portal interaction, and then finally interact with the captive portal to work out how much time you have remaining on the access once you actually gain access, and things like that. We also have the optional item of a machine interface to the captive portal, which is a machine available interface to say, I would like some more time, I would like you to open up, or I would like you to shut it down briefly so that we can save my account balance, for instance, those sorts of things. So that last point is something that we may want to separate out into a separate document or defer or not do, depending on how things work out. So the plan, planning being indispensable and all of that. We need to first answer the questions, what is a captive portal and why do reasonable people deploy captive portals? We're having a bit of a go at answering those two questions today and through the drafts that we have. And then we might design some protocol things, then something will happen and then maybe we'll profit. The question mark there being, will anything change as a result of what we do here? And that means we need to talk to people who build operating systems and people who deploy captive portals and see if the things that we deliver for them actually have any meaningful impact on them, and whether they think they can gain anything by looking at a standardized solution in this space. And that, to me, remains the big question for this working group that I'd like to see some progress on. Sorry, I need to speak up, do I? Sorry. And that's all I have on the introductory thing. So if anyone has any discussion on this point, we have a couple of minutes, but otherwise I think we will move on. Yes.
I have a quick question. On the charter, it says out of scope is onboarding or sorry, my name is Dave Dolson, Sandvine. Out of scope is onboarding or gaining access to a secure network. I was wondering what that meant.
I think this is in the very broadest sense in which we understand captive portals currently, which is that the secure aspects, I believe, relate to being able to identify the captive portal and not be subject to things like man-in-the-middle attacks in order to get.
So the quote is, out of scope are roaming, federation of credentials, network selection, or onboarding / provisioning of clients onto secure or alternate.
Right, network. Right. So if you're thinking about an 802 1x network where you have the whole where clients are enrolled and they're given credentials whereby they might access the network, we're not talking about provisioning those credentials on clients or anything along those lines. This is largely concentrated on we just landed in in a random Wi-Fi network somewhere, and it wants to talk to us and show us a captive portal. No.
So, I mean, I think one example of the sort of things that this is not is things like Eduroam, for example.
Right.
We're sort of trying to say this is not stuff like Eduroam, which is sort of a large federated thing that academic people can use. Some of the wording around that was a little difficult.
So it could still be Wi-Fi at airports and
Yes.
things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of one of the main expected use cases of coffee shops and airports and hotels, etc.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to enter the realm of provisioning Eduroam or working out LDAP enrollments for clients or such that they can join an enterprise network that's, or certificate provisioning or any of those sorts of things. This is trying to specifically solve the things that the protocol statement has identified. Very limited case.
Who do we have up first?
Oh, we have Mark.
Mark, sir.
Quite a nutty quarter.
Do you want the
Yes, please.
do you want the clicky thing or do you just okay?
That's it's just fine.
It's not designed to go much. It takes a while.
It does indeed. Okay, cool. So can I have a microphone?
There's one right in front
the
of you.
big box. Okay,
Yes.
what's that?
It is wireless.
Oh,
It is wireless, but stay as much as you can.
I'm going to flagrantly ignore the pink box.
Okay then.
Okay. So before I start, I'm going to do something that I intend to do at every opportunity I have, which is to tell this working group that there's a moral hazard involved in what we're doing, in that the more we make it possible and easy to use captive portals, the more captive portals will be used. As I've said before, I encounter in my somewhat broad travels many networks who have moved from captive portals to not captive portal, to just requiring a password to get on the network or being open Wi-Fi. And if we make this work too well, we will discourage them from doing that. They will deploy captive portals because they can. That's all I have to say. I got this an hour ago. I could not use it. So Martin asked me to present the draft. I submitted a new version of this just a couple of days ago, or maybe yesterday it was.
Yes.
Yesterday, seems so long ago. As part of the work in the HTTP working group, we noodled on captive portals for a while and tried to identify the problems surrounding them and the parts of the ecosystem and so forth and so on. And so when this working group started, we converted that information from a wiki page that we had, or really used as the basis for this draft. And so it is now titled the Captive Portals Problem Statement, Draft Nottingham Capport Problem 01. And I'll just go through the structure of it pretty quickly. It's not a terribly long draft. I might make it a bit bigger though for them. Can people in the back read that? Yes? Cool, thank you. So this draft attempts to establish a problem statement for captive portals and in order to inform discussions of improving their operation. First section, terminology can be divisive, but in this draft, I chose the term captive network to define a network that employs a captive portal for a variety of purposes. A captive portal is a website that the captive network directs users to, I guess, to achieve that purpose. Talks a little bit about the variety of ways that that can be achieved. And then we have the term captive portal detection to indicate how operating systems try to facilitate or shape how captive portals interact with the user. And sorry, also there's captive portal browsers, which are the browsing component, which are often different than the normal browser that the user uses in their day-to-day life. Any questions about the terminology there? Is that, I know we're not done establishing terminology, but does that seem like a reasonable start? Spontaneous hum, fantastic. Okay, then there's a list of section 2.1 why captive portals are used. Authentication, payment, information, providing information to the user, which might be legal notices or ads, policies, so forth. And also notifications, so notifying the user of account status, network conditions, so forth and so on. And this has been talked about on the list a little bit. I think there's a question, at least in the back of my mind, about, this use case is in the charter, but it does seem like it's a little different than the normal captive portal case, in that when people want to use the captive portal capability for notifications, it's happening at an arbitrary point in the user's session on the network, whereas a captive portal is always a gateway to network access. So that's something maybe that might be interesting to discuss. Excuse me. And then there's a somewhat lengthy section on the issues caused by captive portals, including false negatives. So, for example, basically a operating system or maybe a browser thinking that it's on the open internet when in fact there's a captive portal in place, and so you get bad user experience as a result. Often users are required to log into a captive portal repeatedly. It's quite annoying to move 20 feet and then have to log in again, or log in every 20 minutes, and then we see this quite a bit. Interoperability issues, often because this isn't specified, and I think this is where a standard can provide some help, often because they're trying to exploit certain behaviors of common operating systems. If you're not using a common operating system, or you have a newer version or an older version than they tested with when they created the captive portal, you have really weird behaviors happen. At least that happens to me a fair amount. Confusion, because a captive portal is effectively a man-in-the-middle attack in its common incarnation, both people and machines can become confused about the state of things. So I've had, and I think many of you have probably had cases where, for example, the favicon in your browser gets cached for the website you're going to, but instead of the website's favicon, it's the captive portal's favicon. Machines don't know that they're not on the internet when they're on the captive portal, and that leads to a lot of interesting situations. And users as well, of course. DNS and DNSSEC, when there are forged DNS answers, then DNS caching and resolvers interoperate poorly, and weird things happen, which is not surprising. For TLS, when TLS sessions are intercepted, things go badly by design. And then, if a captive portal is deployed and intercepts TLS and trains the user to click through the certificate warning, that's training users to click through security warnings, which is a bad thing. Ecker. Sorry?
Try the front mic. Yeah, I know.
Move the front one to the back.
Not just training them to click through, stealing your password.
Well, there's that too. We take pull requests. Unexpected configuration. So captive portals don't work with clients using unexpected configurations. So for example, I remember once I was using static, or I specified my own DNS servers in my operating system configuration, went into a captive network and nothing worked. I didn't see the captive portal, I didn't see anything, because they were expecting me to use DHCP to discover my DNS servers, not to have some pre-configured. And so that's really nasty. Stealing access. So because a captive portal associates a user with a MAC address, it's possible to impersonate the authenticated client on the network, which matters if you are paying money or some sort of financially, valuable thing to get access to that network. Non-browser clients, the lovely and ill-fated Internet of Things has issues with captive portals, because the whole idea of a captive portal is that you are exploiting the common usage of web browsers. And on devices that don't have a web browser available, captive portals don't work very well. What was this last? Last one was a pull request. I'm not as familiar with it. For a device with multiple network interfaces, connecting to a network that can require dropping access to alternative network interfaces. If such a device connects to a network with a captive portal, it can lose network connectivity until the captive portal requirements are satisfied. Okay. Section 4, issues caused by the detection, so the operating system. Sorry, Martin, go ahead.
Yeah. So, Martin Thompson. Martin.
Front. Front.
Okay. So, Martin Thompson, maybe the device thing is by design. Maybe they don't want people using their Internet of Shit things on their network, and they really want human eyeballs involved at all points. Maybe I can speculate on that. But that's
So-
the case.
Perhaps. I guess the question is, why does the network operator care about the nature of bits going across it?
Because people produce information that's valuable to them.
So maybe we need eyeball-backed bits on the internet, and some sort of flag. Yeah, a flag. Even happier eyeballs.
It's not just IoT devices. It's not just different devices. It's other programs running on our
Yes.
computers. Things that just display the weather on my phone. They aren't able to trigger the browser to show me the captive portal
Or software updates, for example.
or software updates. Yeah.
I mean, the operating systems are getting better in that they try to provide APIs to expose whether the network is open and available or not. But so moving on.
So we actually do.
It's working.
We do
Sorry,
have.
name?
Hiran Sheffer. We do have an issue about other non-browser programs. And personally, I think the IoT section doesn't really belong there because, well, I'm not going to carry my fridge into a captive network. And I think smaller IoT devices should be working in an environment where there is bad connectivity for various reasons.
So section 4, issues caused by captive portal detection. As we said, operating systems try and detect when a captive portal is present on the network so that it can present it to the user in a reasonable way. But this causes some issues of its own. So there are, for example, false positives. Some networks don't require a web browser to get onto the network, to get network access. They might require a VPN or something. And so the captive portal detection is effectively relying on HTTP as a way to indicate whether the network is open or not. On non-internet networks, captive portal detection in the operating systems currently, they ping a bunch of different websites that they own, the operating system vendor owns, to figure out if they're connected. That's the common way to do it. But that assumes that the network is supposed to be connected to the internet. On a non-internet connected network, a completely closed network, that kind of goes badly. And finally, sandboxing is very common with captive portal detection, where the browser, the captive portal browser that is running to interact with that portal has constraints on its capabilities. It may not allow you to play video, or it may have a different cookie store, so you're not using the user's normal cookie store, and so forth and so on. And so there's some tension here because some people want to show video ads to people on their captive portal before they log in, as Martin showed us so effectively before. What was it with the monkey? Okay.
It's a lemur.
It's a lemur.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, then now it makes sense.
Now it makes sense. I think we need to name the resulting protocol from this working group lemur or something. So there's a certain tension there, and of course it's made worse by the fact that different operating systems have different sandbox constraints, or sometimes even different versions of operating systems. And the final section that's interesting, we have security considerations TBD. That's lovely. 4.1, issues caused by defeating captive portal detection. So when captive portal devices provide optional mechanisms that aim to defeat captive portal detection, that causes problems itself. Such defeat mechanisms aim to avoid the problems caused by captive portal detection, with the consequence that they also cause the same problems that the detection was intended to avoid. That sounds like Martin Thompson.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was your text. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the draft in its current state. It is somewhat hastily written, but I'm happy to take pull requests or issues on it if people would like to do so.
Adam Roach, hello? Really works other. Adam Roach, I'm looking at 4.1 and wondering, I mean, that seems highly unactionable. These are people who are going to be hostile to anything that we produce, right? So okay.
There's a
If Barry thinks it's still worth writing down, I think if I'm worried we're going to concentrate on trying to fix this. It's like, no,
Right.
There's no fixing that. These are the adversary.
Right. I think that the relationship between captive portals and captive portal detection is already somewhat adversarial.
Yes.
And it's not yet clear to me how much a standard can really help that.
Okay. You have more faith than I do.
That's, I didn't express any faith there.
No, it's pretty clear to me that these people are absolutely not interested in what we're doing. We don't really need to take what they're trying to accomplish into account. The people who are trying to defeat captive portal detection will have no interest in anything that comes out of this working group, right?
It depends on their use case,
Okay.
I think.
I think it would help us to know why they're trying to defeat
Yes.
captive portal detection.
Yes.
And I don't think we have a good handle on that.
Right.
Yeah, I got to say roughly that, though it does seem like in many cases, they're trying to defeat captive portal detection for reasons that we would not be happy about, as opposed to, that they want to force you through a particular working path. So
I know some of them are going to want to do it because they want to escape the sandbox, for example.
It's a trap.
yeah, right.
Okay. So, Jason Livingood, so on that issue, I think it's important to find out if there are usability issues that are highlighted, because then maybe it's something that the group could solve. But to the extent that it's something completely different, it's just a philosophical opposition to it or whatever else, some of those things you can't help. Sure.
Stuart Cheshire, Apple. There's a question I've asked before, and I may not get an answer this time. I'm wondering if there's some conference or some event where operators get together in a room like this to discuss what they're doing. Because if there is, I don't know what that event is. Is this literally just equipment salesmen convincing people that they want to buy something because, look, it'll let you do this?
So when we were doing the work in the HTTP working group, we reached out to folks like the Wi-Fi Alliance and other industry groups and got very minimal amounts of interest from them. Since then, we've been trying to encourage individual vendors to come into the room. Personally, I think that one possible interesting direction to go into would be if the operating system detection vendors can get together and provide a relatively united front, and also look at some incentives on how they can reward good actors in the ecosystem and punish bad ones. That might be interesting.
If there was such an industry event, I think Apple would be willing to participate and give a presentation there, but we've not managed to find a venue to give that presentation.
Okay.
From the Jabber room, MCR2 says, I think that we can avoid the arms race. And then in response to Stuart, says some of this happens at NANOG, but I suggest we look at the hospitality industry conferences.
Yep. So we're going to take Mike Bishop quickly. Mike, we're going to push the button. Hopefully this works.
Well, it worked in HTTP yesterday, so hopefully you can see me now. I will comment that some of the goals are kind of in opposition to each other. So, for example, from an operating system side, we're in the situation of, on the phone, we have an internet connection over mobile broadband, and we will continue to use that as the primary internet pathway for the device until we get out of the captive portal. So we can't just launch a browser a general system browser to deal with the captive portal, because it'll use the mobile broadband interface and we'll never see the captive portal. So to deal with that, we launch a captive browser that is locked to that particular interface, and we pull it down once we've gotten out of the captive portal and we detect internet. The problem that we have seen is that some captive portal vendors, they want the authentication to happen through their own app, or they want it to happen such that when you clear the captive portal, you then land on a page of their choosing. Like pretty much every hotel that I've gone through the sign-in experience on then wants to land you on the page that tells you how great your hotel is. And as soon as we detect that, okay, you're out of the captive portal, we're going to close that captive browser. So they really want to be in a general purpose browser so they can control where you go afterward or control the experience more thoroughly. And within Windows, we have tried a couple affordances to say, well, if you have your app and you have your hotspot network, you can control that. You can run the authentication experience through your app if you want to. While that has worked with some of the hotspot networks, I have not seen that take off with the world in general. So I think that goes back to, we really need to understand what their goals are. But in some cases also, their goals and our goals are a little bit at odds, and we have to do some negotiation and, as you say, incentives.
Dan Wing, I work for Cisco, and we have like 6 different captive portals that all work differently. Even amongst those, they have very little incentive to align them and make them all work the same because they have the same logo on the box, because a hotel or whatever buys a certain box and they like those certain features and the management that it has, the way it captures the user, the way it generates new usernames or rotating passwords or whatever it does that convinced them that that was the coolest captive portal and the coolest 802.11 AC and the coolest whatever, and a pretty color and a blue LED or whatever. So yeah, we need alignment and incentives. The customers are not the operating system vendors for those boxes, and that's not where the interop problem is.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dan. I think that just from my standpoint, we have a much more realistic chance of changing, 3 operating systems and incenting the captive portal vendors that way than by coordinating what looks like thousands of captive portal vendors.
So let me be clear, I agree with that. But to date, all they've done, all that happens is I get a new requirement for my customer and it gets implemented, and there's this, chase of all this chaos that you see. So cutting this down to, this is the best way to achieve something close to this without messing everything up, I think that's where IETF can help. And then we can publish a spec and we can tell all the vendors, this is the best way to do it. It's sort of like what Behave turned into, is we're not going to fix all the chaos that exists and all of the crap that exists, but we can document, this is the best way to achieve the end goal you're trying to get to that causes the least harm for everyone. And this is what the operating systems are going to expect, or one of these, whatever, 5 different behaviors, 6 different behaviors. And these are the packets they're going to send. This is the sort of response that they get. And if you want to go outside that,
Sure. We can't stop them.
Yeah, we can't stop them.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, and I think that because there's no target for those captive portal vendors to shoot for now, that's part of the reason for the chaos. And so if we give them a target,
Yeah.
at least the good or neutral actors might.
Right. They're doing spaghetti on the wall.
Yeah.
But
that implies that we have good input from a variety of different sources, and I'm not sure where
right now
they're at.
there is no input from anywhere about how to do my captive portal.
Yeah. And that was, I think that's maybe what Stuart was getting to.
Yes, exactly.
So Dan, before you go too far, a question for you from the Jabber room from Michael Richardson again. How can we get the product managers from those 6 Cisco groups in this room? And are you part of one of those groups?
No, I'm not. How to get them in the room? I think we need to cycle this through another couple meetings to nail this down. And then that turns into requirements that we get customers to ask for. A customer says, I want you to comply with RC, whatever this will be. Section 7 is the perfect solution for what I need. Does your product comply with that? Same thing that we get, how you do ARP, how you do HSRP and everything else.
Then a second unrelated comment off the Jabber chat room from Valentin Gosu. I think it makes sense to target the 90% of captive portals that are willing to play nice with everyone and not the ones which do bad stuff.
Great. Jason, sir. See if this will actually work. You have that mic, and this clicky thing should work for you.
Laptop or?
It's RF, so it should work.
Oh, so I don't have to point them.
I'll try it and see if it should work in any direction.
Okay. Whoa. Wow. Hi, my name is Jason Livingood. I work for Comcast in my day job, and I think Warren on the list had asked, hey, could operators give some examples of like real world captive portals? And so I thought I would do that, and ergo these slides. So I think that I classify them as an operator into two kind of large buckets. One is the traditional captive portal, and this falls into a few examples, and I'll show screenshots just to explain, but service activation, so you don't have service and you've, say, purchased a device or you've purchased access or want to buy access and you're connecting to a network and you want to get your service activated. Another is non-payment. You haven't paid your bill and you suddenly get into a captive portal and you have to solve that. Abuse, so you've done something abusive in the network and you're put in a walled garden. And then Wi-Fi examples, I think maybe the running animal thing, monkey, whatever that was one example of the day pass where you can watch some video to get a 1 day pass or 1 hour pass where you buy one for $3 or whatever. And then Wi-Fi roaming, which I'll show. And then there's another one which a lot of people don't often think of, which is what I would call sort of non-service interrupting notifications. And I documented this a little bit in RFC 6108 a few years ago. And this is where you have continuous access that is uninterrupted in a manner, but you're presented with some sort of notice. And the first one that we did that on our network for was a malware alert, that you've got malware infected on some box in your house and how to deal with that. And I'll talk about some of the other examples when we get there. You have a question?
So Martin Thompson, the last 4 items here.
Yeah.
Is this a situation where you have a prior relationship with the customer and they have interacted with you in the past?
Right.
It's just that you don't have any way of getting to them at that particular point in time.
Exactly so. So there's generally already access established. You've got some relationship established. And there's a need to communicate something that does not necessarily rise to network access in totality having to be restricted or cut off. And so it's a subtler form of messaging that is needed back and forth. And a lot of people say, well, the alternatives are like email and phone call and postal mail and stuff that...
I can add another one to that list, which was why I got up. We have this web push thing now, and that's turning into a way that you can do this sort of messaging.
So maybe that may be the solution.
And this is equivalent in many respects to the sorts of things that you see in cellular networks, where they have the ability to deliver Amber Alerts and other flood warnings and various other things. You're asking for a similar sort of capability.
It may be. There is a difference, though, I think, to some wireless networks, because our ability, let's say, to present that kind of a notice in our Wi-Fi network, because we have a wireless access gateway, or WAG, is a lot different from our DOCSIS or our fiber network, where you don't have a middle box that someone's going through that can sort of transparently insert itself into the communication channel.
Here the point being that you wouldn't have to rely on having a middle box.
Yeah, perhaps so.
This is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. So it sounds to me like you're saying that if I have my guest from out of town staying in my apartment while I'm away at an IETF meeting and I've forgotten to pay my bill, that you're planning on showing my guest my billing information.
Well, I'll show you a screenshot of it, but certainly this is one, so everyone here asks for examples of operator use cases. Operators, if you don't pay your bill, might tend to ask you to pay your bill. And typically with an internet service, they'll put you in a non-payment walled garden, and the only page you'll see is, hey, sorry, you didn't pay your bill for 3 months or something like this, please pay it now. So, however, if you happen to be in some networks, maybe there's a public SSID being broadcast by the wireless gateway or something that you can get on if you have credentials, but I don't know. Design goals that operators usually think about, or at least one here does, is that the traditional examples that I gave should work whether you're wired or wireless. I think that's pretty obvious. And it should work in any type of web browser. Mostly this is just to say that it should refactor for mobile screens. And for the non-service interrupting examples, it generally should not interrupt non-browser applications. So specifically the system that we have was designed not to interrupt, say, if you're playing on the PlayStation Network or watching Netflix or using Vonage or something like this, using a non-web application. So showing some examples, so making it brighter. So, I mean, these are obvious ones, but just to show some actual screenshots, you've gotten a box at home or you've bought it at Best Buy or on Amazon and you're connecting it to the network and it takes you through an activation flow and, step by step by step, eventually you're granted network access and then you're out of the captive portal and you have full unfettered network access. These are just examples to show that it works on a mobile screen, so operators spend time on that. This is the example that you were just asking about for non-payment. Again, I think you have to, I don't know why it's sort of looks kind of odd there.
Sorry.
Anyway, I think in our example, someone's not going to get this out of the blue. They're going to get several emails, they're going to get several phone calls, and it's only usually after an extended period of time of inaction that you get this. But it does happen and people have to pay their bills. And so, if they don't do that, then of course they can pay online and so on. Yes.
It's probably not, the screenshot seems fine, but I think
Yeah, it's all.
DKG's point wasn't that he didn't want to have the screenshot shown, it was he didn't want his personal information shown to his house guests.
Yeah, so yeah, there we go. No doubt. So then there's an abuse walled garden. And so the example use cases here is somebody's part of a DDoS attack or they're doing their own big DOS attack or whatever. And they're basically pushed aside and said, sorry, we're going to cut off network access for now. You're in an abuse walled garden. Please call us so we can talk to you about what the heck's going on with your connection. And this happens from time to time. At the moment, we've been going through some SSDP abuse. There's been some discussion of this on the NANOG mailing list. So, there have been a few thousand people recently, put into these kind of walled gardens while we figure out a longer term way to solve that. And then we have some Wi-Fi examples. So typically in our Wi-Fi network, you have to log in with your username and password. There's also a federated model, and I know that's out of scope, but you can get in and if you're a part of another ISP's Wi-Fi network and authenticate. And this is an example of one in the local train stations in the Philadelphia area. And then an example of, there might be weather events when the portal is opened up for free and you can click through this. There's also pay-per-use examples, and sometimes the sponsors of different venues, like a sports venue or other place, might not want you to pay, but you have to watch a quick promo video or something along those lines. And I should add one thing. So Alex Roscoe, who's in the audience, sent a note a moment, maybe earlier today, to the mailing list. And Alex is one of our Wi-Fi engineers. And the one thing that he was talking about is the amount of testing and QA that has to go on. So for every kind of device permutation that there are, we're constantly doing testing to make sure that the activation flow works correctly. And that, to me, points out a real need for standardization, because if you think of every operator having to do that kind of customization and testing and so on, it just doesn't make sense on some level and doesn't seem sustainable, especially with the number of devices and variation in device operating systems. And then we have some of the more subtle notifications that I mentioned before. The first top one is the malware one. And when they take action, it takes them to a malware remediation portal. The bottom one is another example of you've given someone a speed upgrade, say from 100 megabits per second to 300 megabits per second, and the device that they have at home that they may own in many cases is no longer sufficient. And so it's a notification to say, hey, go replace that, and here's how to do that. That happens very commonly these days, especially as speeds are going north of 100 megs and some hardware has only a fast Ethernet interface. And then, things that our customers really love, copyright alerts. It's a real positive. They tell us that's one reason that they choose us, copyright alerts. But actually, all joking aside, in the US, you have the DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act. In order for ISPs to maintain a safe harbor and not be responsible for policing the content that traverses the network, they are required by the Act to forward notices to customers that have, where a copyright holder claims that there has been an infringement. And as part of this, they might get a letter or they might get this alert. As an ISP, we don't do anything like cut off their service or slow their service. Some other ISPs, either in the US or in other countries, may do things like that. So it might vary. And then another thing that people really dig is usage-based billing. So, that's another type of notification that someone might get. So just in conclusion, I think one idea here is to sort of a little bit more broadly define how you think of captive portal. It's the first bullet there is no access without interaction with captive portal is one. I think that's the obvious one. We all think of, you hit a captive portal when you don't have access to the network and you're trying to get that initial grant. But I think that there's the other more subtle case, which is where you have access and it's working fine, but there's some need to provide, say, a security notice or other sort of thing. And the one example that I used at the bottom is, like an emergency alert system, like, hey, there's a tornado coming in 5 minutes, go to your basement right now. And they might not have their television on to get an emergency alert system notice. And then, do you want me to take your question now or go to the next one?
No, keep going.
Okay. And then, should work across many device types and software clients. It should probably have non-HTTP types of channels that might work because some devices might not have that. So maybe there's sort of a text-only mode or all text sort of thing. And perhaps it's worth looking at some of the stuff that Steve Bowers talked about where it's more OS-level interaction and some kind of messaging channel there. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I sort of noticed about this is that a number of these seem to be situations in which the customer would prefer you not get in their face, and you've decided in your sole discretion that you should.
Yeah.
So to give you an example, when I go over before I changed to T-Mobile, when I did dealing with AT&T, they sent me an SMS complaining about it. It wasn't like when I made a phone call, I had to listen to 10 seconds of someone telling me, listen, you're over your limit, during the phone call, right? So, the customers pay you money, you have a way of contacting them. You just decided that you don't want to do that and you want to shove this in their face instead. Now, that's a perfectly reasonable decision. My point is, I'm surprised to see this last point where you say another messaging channel, because the property of this channel is most salient here is the user has no option to opt out of it. And I assure you, if you have a messaging channel, these will opt out of it. So, so I guess I don't believe you when you suggest this, because I think you won't use it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think you should provide, maybe the working group should provide a variety of options. We should talk about opt-in and opt-out and all the issues there. I think here I'm trying to really describe just the kinds of things that are happening today.
Sure.
And so, I think on some level, this group has to hear those things in a non-judgmental manner. So you might not agree with all of them, but this is meant to sort of show what's happening, right?
Sure, I understand.
It doesn't mean the working group has to address all of them.
Right, but I'm trying to extract, I guess, I'm sorry if it's being judgmental, but I'm trying to extract what I consider to be the salient requirements. And it seems to me the salient requirement is that you want it not to be optional. And so anything that basically doesn't impersonate something the user wants to do is inherently not going to be non-optional unless, or otherwise, unless it's hostile to the user's control on the computer, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't interpret anything I'm showing here as, being against non-optional or for non-optional or whatever. I think it just depends. But, just to go back to your one question about, hey, you got an SMS and aren't there alternative ways to contact you? So on some level, you can sign up for an internet service without having a lot of information like a phone number and other things sometimes. And there are many cases where customers may ignore all of those other channels. And so, ultimately it's an IP-based service. It seems like there ought to be an IP-based mechanism to communicate with them that requires some interaction. And there are examples, especially around security incidents, where either you need to cut off service or they need to take action immediately to do something. And we've had examples, so just to go back to some of the malware ones, the DNS changer stuff and other ones where, let's say the FBI was going to take down the rogue DNS server that all these customers, because of malware, were pointed to. And we were going to have maybe several 100,000 customers that on the day that the FBI took action they wouldn't have access. So what would they do? And so, we needed some mechanism to provide advance notice, and you use every possible channel you can. because there's a subset of customers that will ignore months worth of emails, will ignore all these other things, and at some point will lose, internet access in that example. Or worse, if they might have a keylogger on their computer that they need to know about, and you want to say, hey, you've got a really serious problem. Maybe, your identity's been stolen, your banking information's been stolen, whatever. So, expectations, I would say, among different customers vary widely, and probably among different countries very widely about the kind of notifications that are okay or not. So, I don't know.
Hi, Dave Dolson, Sandvine. It looks like you're using all sorts of access technologies here. So it'd be fair to say that you require an IP layer solution as opposed to a Wi-Fi or a HTTP or something like
correct.
that.
Yeah, I think so.
Comments from the Jabber room. Mike Bishop says, someone from Comcast may know WFA solutions better than I. Hotspots 2.0 R2 seems to define a lot of the purchase, terms and contracts, etc. flow and transfer to full network access. How much of this is already solved and the problem is deployment? If I recall correctly, R1 assumed you had already had credentials and were just coming just for roaming, i.e. cell phones. Well, R2 provided a sign up, payment, consent to terms and conditions path to acquire credentials in the first place.
So maybe Alex, I don't know if you have any comment there. I will say, there are different solutions for Wi-Fi versus, other forms of network access. And so we end up having a system for each one of the access methodologies. Can you speak to the WFA, the Wi-Fi Alliance?
Alex Roscoe, Comcast. So we do have some plans to do full implementation with Hotspot 2.0. We're still choosing to do the captive portal route to do installation of the profiles with our own HTML pages. I think there are some business reasons why we want to have specific branding within our captive portals along with this process. I think providing login I don't know the specification specifically down to realms with different ISPs, but sometimes we do provide other ISPs such as like Time Warner Cable or Bright House access to our networks. And then when users try to log in, we need to figure out which authentication server to send those out to install profiles. So I don't know the login mechanism with. I guess it's a defined login form is what you're asking about, right?
I guess it's the Jabber in this. So hopefully that answers the question. I don't know.
We can ask Mike Bishop to please write back to the Jabber room with whatever the answer was to that question.
That's not my point.
3, 2, 1.
David Bird adds, one of the things Hotspot 2.0 R2 doesn't solve is the non-service interrupting messaging. It has remediation, but that takes you off network. Still no answer off Mike Bishop.
Okay. So one last thought about well, maybe it's security considerations for any draft and whatever. I have noticed, maybe not with the vendors that we've used or the software that we've developed, but other vendors that come by, they often have some really odd ways of managing security. It seems like there are some security shortcomings in some of those systems. So hopefully that, the work that this group does can result in some, more secure mechanisms for having these portals. That's all I have if there's no more questions. So thanks for your time. Just some operator examples. Thanks.
Thank you. So thank you, Jason. So we have a question for the room. We would like someone to volunteer to take a stab at the protocol draft. It doesn't need to be great, but something to get started with, and there will be some back and forth and iteration. Is there anybody who is interested or willing to volunteer for that?
I went through that earlier. So it's in the charter, what is expected here, and this is on the slide that I had earlier, which I think that Warren has. Upper slide, yeah, that. So ostensibly, this is the sort of thing that we're looking for. Now, if it turns out that no one wants to do that, I think we're done.
Well, okay, so I have a very basic assumption about this. And I have read this. Is there an assumption that the portals are cooperating in this effort? And, no, sorry, three modes. Are they status quo ante? Are they cooperating? That is, they would make it be modified in some way? Or are they actively hostile?
I think we can rule out actively hostile for most of this.
Beyond the ways in which they're already actively hostile, or you mean new ways in which they're actively hostile?
Oh, if you want new ways, I think actively hostile in the sense that they're unmodified and unwilling to comply with this sort of thing, then I don't think we need to worry about this working for those.
I mean, let me suggest a very concrete, trivial, design, right?
Yep.
So right now Apple has this array of things they try to, of folks to try to go to, right? So, and there's this arms race between them and the Captive Portal people. So,
it's not really an arms race as far as I can tell, I think.
Is Apple's losing?
If Apple wanted to win, I think they could, but the problem is that
perhaps
that might do a lot of damage.
In any case, I mean, so the most trivial protocol possible is you go to any arbitrary internet endpoint and there's a header that says, if you're a Captive Portal, please do something, do X, Y, and Z here. So I'm not saying it's a great design. I'm just saying it's a design which would work, assuming the Captive Portal is attempted to do it. Would that meet is that consistent with the kind of thing we're talking about here?
Yes, I think
every protocol in the world Captive Portal be modified,
I would imagine that none of this is going to work without Captive Portals being modified in some way. I don't think that there's any expectation that we would be able to do any of this without some change on them. And yes, they would have to cooperate. There's a question of incentives for Captive Portals in order to do this, and that's a question that I think we need to discuss.
Yeah, and one of the earlier thoughts was, if we make it so that more people actually, complete the Captive Portal or get access to the internet, or more people watch the video, then potentially Captive Portal people have an incentive to actually deploy this. If we make it easier so that they don't have to do as much tricky interception, if we make it easier so that more people can use it, hopefully there is an incentive for Captive Portal people to actually deploy it. And we think that there is.
In the Jabber room, Valentin Gosu says, I expect CP operators would be willing to cooperate because if they had a clear signaling mechanism, they wouldn't need to intercept HTTPS, which is bad for both parties. With agreement across the chat room.
Mark Nottingham, that was along the lines of what I was going to say, which is we do have an opportunity. The number of HTTP, plain HTTP sites is diminishing, and there are a lot of people working on making that number smaller. So that's perhaps an opportunity.
So I noticed that Jonathan Lennox is not in the room, so I'm going to repeat his comment, which is he suggested, perhaps in jest, that we should repurpose HTTP as the Captive Portal detection protocol. Yeah, we're done with port 80, so we can rename it in the IANA registry as Captive Portal detection, and we're done. Yeah.
Alex Roscoe. Just a response to an earlier topic that was brought up about, why are people trying to defeat Captive Portals? And I think it was the initial sandboxes that the operating systems had developed were very limited. I remember some of the earlier ones didn't even have JavaScript. And I think just basic form authentication failed. And I think developers were just like, all right, I'm going to respond to success.html illegitimately. So I think the sandboxes I think even over the past 2 years have actually increased in functionality a lot, where I haven't really seen a defeated Captive Portal in a while. It's been I don't know, I think over a year or so for me.
I've seen what appears to be a failure in a detection on occasion, quite often.
Okay, I think I see more Capture portals when I travel, but
yeah,
not much.
So the other aspect of sandboxing that I don't think Mark captured in his talk and you didn't mention just now is continuity. So we find there's a lot of situations where users go back to the same network multiple times. And we see now with MAC randomization, the network's unable to identify that device as being the same one. And so they throw up the captive portal again, and the captive portal gets thrown up into a sandbox, and that sandbox is again a completely different one to the last time, and it has none of the state. And that's a reason why the sandboxing might want to, a captive portal might want to defeat a sandbox.
Dave Olson, Sandvine. I think it doesn't seem to say it here, but I think another goal would be like a backwards compatibility sort of view where you can say, if your captive portal does this, it will be good in the future. So something that browsers or operating systems could check for, does this location have this? If so, cooperate, and kind of find a way in which both can move forward together. So captive portal can add a feature that browsers that support it will have a better experience, and browsers can add a feature that when they're in a captive portal that supports it, there's a better experience. But the captive portals could still say, well, if that didn't work, I'm still going to sandbox. I'm still going to fall back to the old behavior that's less good. But it seems like that would be a good goal as well, is to try to come up with something like that.
Dan Wing, just your last comment. The MAC randomization, I don't think is causing that problem, because when you connect to the SSID, you use the same MAC that you did last time, which is usually your real MAC. Windows 10, I think, changes and uses a different MAC, but it's a different MAC per SSID that it connects to. So that SSID, from its perspective, sees the same MAC every time a connect happens. But it's true, they have a randomized MAC while they're probing, but before they've connected.
Oh, we're about to learn differently, maybe.
Oh, what?
Confirm? Can you confirm that?
No, I was not going to confirm that. I was going to jump off of the last comment. Tommy Polyapple. Yeah, I'd love to see the protocol fleshed out, but I do think there needs to be a little bit more, I don't know, just brainstorming or constraints put around it. Like one comment you're making about, what the browsers can do. Are we defining this protocol as something that the browsers are doing or that the client systems are doing? It's like, do we want, yeah. Mark Nottingham. So I think that gets back to the discussion that Dan Wing and I was having, which is one way to go about this is to specify captive portal detection and get all of the operating system or number of the operating system vendors in a row on that and affect the world in that fashion. The other would be to define a well-behaved captive portal or different classes of well-behaved captive portals and hope that over time there's gravity towards one or more of those in the captive portal implementations.
Yeah. So what we have in the charter, I think, is probably both of those things at the same time, and it's not. We didn't have that clarity at the time, and to a large extent, this is what a well-behaved captive portal might do. But then this idea of what the detection looks like is an interesting thing to pursue as well.
So I guess when you were asking for the protocol stuff, are you talking more about the detection protocol or about these? Because there is this other part of like, what are your capabilities and all that.
Yes to all of the above.
In one document?
No.
Doesn't have to be.
Okay.
Nope.
Two would be fine.
Because it'd be interesting to focus on them separately because they're potentially very different domains.
Yeah. Correct. Yes.
Oh, we're actually going to take Mike Bishop first, if that's okay. Mike, sir.
So first off, I want to throw 2 bits of data out there. So from our telemetry from Windows Phone 8.1, we see that about 1.6% of captive portals let our probe through. And the way we detected that was we added a second site that we check for that was not documented, and we compare the results in telemetry. And so we think that it's a minority of networks, but it's certainly an annoying minority of networks for many users. I think if we had a captive portal that wanted to play along and reduce the bad experience, then part of how you could achieve that is more proactive notification of the device that they are in a captive portal and need to take some action. So, I mean, Hotspot 2.0, I think, accomplishes that by tagging network in 802.11u. So before the client even connects, it knows that this network does not have internet access and I need to go to this URL. We could accomplish the same thing, I don't know, a DHCP option. If there were a way for saying, if you're man in the middling my connection, announce that you're a man in the middle and that the connection will not be allowed. I don't know, some kind of TLS alert. There are different ways you can do it, but ultimately it comes back to, if the captive portal doesn't want you to know that you're in a captive portal, you're going to get into an arms race.
Actually, and just a very quick note, RFC 7710 actually does fairly much exactly what you suggested. DHCP tells you that you're behind a captive portal and where it lives. So that's worth
That's
noting.
good to know. I'll look that up. 7710?
7710.
Okay, now.
Your Honor, Chef, if you want to incentivize captive portals, you will need to specify client behavior, and not just at the OS level, but also at the browser level. So if your hotel wants to open that how nice is the hotel page and not have it closed automatically, we actually need to specify that the browser shall open the page and should not close it.
Okay.
That's legit in our opinion.
And so we touched on some of the reasons that might be difficult earlier.
So, Mark Nottingham, just another thing that strikes me listening to Mike Bishop. One thing we may also have to wrestle with is quality of implementation of captive portals. I very strongly suspect that many of the captive portal deployments out there are not terribly well written or haven't been thought about very carefully. The people writing them are often not people very familiar with web browsers and how they work, or even sometimes with networking and how that works. So, even thinking about, the captive portal is a binary state that you are behind or not behind a captive portal is something a trap we probably shouldn't fall into too much. So I'm not sure what the actionable outcome is here, except that it may be even harder than we think, and maybe test suites or something might help down the road.
I mean, I think you're on an important point here, which is that anything which relies on the user agents behaving in a specific way and showing user stuff the user actually didn't want to see, because that's what the captive portal wants, is not going to work. Because, I mean, it's antithetical to open standards and free software. So, that's simply not a viable option. It's not a contract, an enforceable contract, right?
Yeah. So from the floor, I mean, if I were presented the choice of showing the captive portal in the browser and I knew that the user didn't want it, I wouldn't show it.
Exactly. So, I mean, you can expect the browsers to act under those circumstances. So that in fact seems to me what makes this hard is precisely that any mechanical the more mechanical this becomes, the easier it becomes for me to write software that will attempt to do what the user would have otherwise done, so the user doesn't have to interact with the captive portal.
So Jason Living, can I ask just a challenging question here, which is how would the group, I'm not disagreeing with the objective you stated, but how would the group actually manage to do that? Because we have HTTP and somebody can use that to create a phishing website, or we have SMTP, somebody can use that to send spam. So how do we fence out the, sort of something to, prevent those sort of things?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, aren't you suggesting that there are certain types of captive portals that should be allowed, and there are others that should not be allowed, based on a judgment that you explained, that there are certain types that you feel that are antithetical to what users like, or antithetical to open standards? While I might not disagree with that, there might be other people that do disagree with that. So how do you bring that judgment to what should be standardized or not in this case? So how do you say what kind of captive portal is okay from that standpoint versus what's not on a technical level?
Sure. Well, so to be clear, what I'm saying is antithetical to open standards is not captive portals. It's having the browser show the user content he doesn't want because that's what the captive portal wants. And so, I mean, in the same way that DRM is antithetical to open standards. So, I mean, the browsers attempt to emulate what they think the user's judgment is, and maybe they get that right, maybe they get it wrong, and they give the user some options. But it's not that, I mean, the browser don't think it's their job to decide for the user, they think it's their job to emulate the user's internal state.
Right. So I think in that case, then you're looking for a mechanism that you would extract from a browser client in that sense. So we can assume then, let's say, that the user will express their preferences via a browser, and that we should be able to, in a captive portal standard, say, look at those preferences and then act based upon them, right? Am I understanding that?
Not quite. I guess. So let me, I mean, here's a concrete example. Say that the say that the way the captive portal works, as many do, is there's an implicit bargain that the user goes, not bargain, but the mechanics are the user goes to a site and watches some small amount of video, and then once that video is done, then the internet is open. And my point is merely that if the browsers could actually reliably detect when this is happening, and know exactly how long they leave the video up, and know when they had to stop, they would simply take that and not show it to the user, because the user doesn't want to see it. And so what I'm saying is that the more this becomes mechanical, and the more this becomes stereotyped, the more we can determine exactly what the captive portals are, then the more it's going to be in the browser's interest to suppress all those things. And so I don't understand how this is going to work in a way, unless we have incentive alignment between the people running the captive portals, the people running the browsers. I don't understand how this is going to work, because any mechanical, because it seems to me that almost any mechanical protocol here is going to simply make it easier to evade the captive portal, which is what the browser want to do, which is what the captive portal don't want you to do.
So, Yaron Sheffer, so I disagree with what Eka just said, because technically he's right, but while many of us, maybe all of us, have pop-up blockers and whatever blockers installed in our browsers, most normal people do not, and the ad industry is still flourishing, even though this is technically possible. So we should strive towards some level of balance where the majority of people get reasonably good service, even if there's a captive portal present. The captive portal people get what they want, which is to show us this shit in the browser. And overall, the quality of the experience, including TLS and so on, is reasonable. Even if for many of us, we will deploy mechanical anti-whatever stuff.
So kind of responding to Eka, as time goes by, hopefully the internet gets more secure and more resistant to stuff like man-in-the-middle attacks, HSTS, cert pinning, stuff like that. That makes it harder and harder and harder for captive portal people to do interception. So even though they might not like whatever comes out of this, hopefully the incentives will align well enough that, in order for them to do any sort of interception, they will be willing to go through whatever protocol or process we come up with. If they have no other choice and can't do what they currently do, maybe they will be willing to use this. And I suspect I worded that really badly.
It's David Olson. Just because I don't like getting notices in the mail about my bills, I could install a paper shredder in my mail slot. and that would be a way of defeating those messages I don't like. So, where there's an incentive to, here's a message from your service provider. Do you not want to receive any more messages from your service provider? And you say, okay, I mean, I guess you can do that. But there's a certain also incentive to receive them. So if you want to get on the network, maybe you want the message about what you need to do.
I probably stay at 50 hotels a year, and I never once want to see something that hotel showed me.
So, yeah, but Echo, before you leave, how much of the time that you've been at the hotel has the captive portal experience sucked and it's made you annoyed? Probably every time. If we made that suck slightly less, would your life be better? Would you be happier with the hotel? Would you be more likely to use the internet there? So there is some alignment of incentives, right? If we make the captive portal experience suck less, even though you have to see their stupid page with the advertising telling you how wonderful the restaurant is, you might be willing to do that because you'll actually be able to use the internet. Currently, the captive portal, often you can't use the internet because you can't get through it because it sucks.
I feel like you're misunderstanding the game theory here, which is that the game theory is, this is not a personal bargain I'm making with a hotel. It is the way that the browser manufacturers and other people make their clients behave. And so once the hotels move towards doing something that is easy to evade, then the clients will start evading because they have no incentive not to. And so I don't like, yes, if we could make some grand bargain that I'd be willing to watch 1.3 milliseconds of video in order not to avoid, then maybe we could do that. But it's not an enforceable deal.
A couple things off the Jabber room. We have Ellen DeKaka asking, what about deployment timeframes? With hundreds or thousands of captive portals, are we doing the work of Sisyphus here? And David Bird chimed in on a different topic. I think solving the HTTPS issue is a priority for the group.
Alex Roscoe. I think if we design a good experience, if we design a good protocol, I think we're going to see developers that want to implement it. I want to start implementing this in my captive portal. So I think if you can design if you want your operating system to have a nice slick way to connect to the internet via Wi-Fi or via your cellular, I think they're going to want to go the route of developing a cool feature. I think that this working group can do that. That we can design that slick protocol. So I think it goes against saying that people will try to cheat it. I think it would be the opposite. I think people would want to use it.
This is DKG. I'm also very regularly frustrated by captive portals. And we've heard a lot of different ideas here about what might be a way to do this and what kind of things to approach. So one thing I think that maybe this working group needs to decide is, do we care about the full set of things the network might want to inform the user about, or do we just care about figuring out going from the limited network to the full network, right? So you had brought up a bunch of examples that include hurricane warnings and malware warnings and other things, other information from the network to the device. And so if we're thinking about it in the general sense of, do we want to build a scheme so that when you connect to a network, the network gives your device information and tries to show it to you? Do we want it to build that general scheme, or do you want to try to make it more constrained? And if we make it more constrained, there's a question of, well, what do we do about networks that are going to try to abuse that particular service to show you arbitrary information just because they think they can, or because they think it's a good idea, or because of the hurricane? So I think that's a challenging line to draw if we want to draw it. And if we don't want to draw it, then we need to think. So currently, we do actually expect our devices to get some information from the network they connect to, because we have DHCP. And there is some level of information that we do want from the network we connect to. So we haven't 100% ruled it out.
So I think Echo raised the point that perhaps some of this information is information we don't want as users.
In fact, I regularly get information from DHCP servers that I don't want. And
right, but just know how to ignore
my user
that.
agent just dumps it on the floor.
Correct. And Echo's suggesting that this might happen with the browser just the same as it happens with DHCP. As far as this extra messaging stuff, what the hell is that? I'm going to try to
Yeah, I
ignore
think
that.
someone's jackhammer, maybe? I don't know. In terms of the other cases that I explained, as much as, I think the objective was simply to explain all of the ways that they are used today, and it wasn't necessarily a reflection of what this group ought to prioritize on and so on. My personal view is that you should start with the simplest case first and work iteratively. So if you can solve the case of you have no access and you're trying to be granted access, and that's, draft one, great, let's book it, ship it, have people come and demo it at Bits and Bytes, and maybe that's a way to get some vendors involved. And then if there are other cases, then maybe the group might want to continue on, but solve something easy and do that first. Build some momentum in the group.
I think I was going to point out that I believe that the charter does not permit us to do some of those extra things as well. We're chartered for the narrow task of identifying what information the captive portal needs in order for it to release network access, and then the status stuff. Nothing more than that. I think we might call it. Thank you, everyone. It's time.
Has everyone signed the blue sheets? If not, please sign the blue sheets. Okay. Oh, and thank you, Paul, for minutes. Bye.
That was a boff.
Very last comment. Charter that we aren't chartered. We aren't chartered to do the more sophisticated things. So mine's information. So the thing that I'm curious about, maybe to listen to this to see what the broader interpretation is, but I read the second bullet in the charter, things to do.
Oh, okay.
Really quite broad. It's just a URL via which to interact with the captive portal. And as soon as there's a URL, I now have a web interface with all sorts of things.
So I actually believe that with web push, Jason gets that use case, gets that capability anyway.